where literacy evolves with technology and language proficiency. This is the Multiliterate Mind podcast with Dr. Liza Trejo and Marnina Falk-Coleman.
Hello and welcome to the Multiliterate Mind. I am Marnina Falk-Coleman, and I am joined by my colleague, Dr. Liza Trejo.
Hi, Marnina. How are you?
Doing well. Welcome back to the studio, Liza.
Glad to be here.
Together, we are exploring how language proficiency, multiliteracy, and human connection are evolving in an AI-driven world. We are so excited to welcome our guest, Dawn Samples, today.
Welcome to the podcast, Dawn.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we are so excited to have you join us. Before we dive in, let us give our listeners a bit of background about you.
So Dawn Samples is an educator and instructional leader with more than 30 years of experience supporting language programs across the country. She has served as a teacher, district administrator, national consultant, and professional learning leader, and she has contributed to major ACTFL initiatives and national task forces. Many may not know that Dawn helped found the AML learning team at Avant before moving to her current role as an instructional lead at Linco, where she partners with teachers and districts to design proficiency-driven learning grounded in strong instructional beliefs and authentic practice.
And for me, this conversation is also personal because Dawn was my mentor and colleague in my previous district. So much of who I am today as a person and an educator is due to her leadership and influence.
Welcome, Dawn. And today we're exploring something timely and honest. Why is there still a gap between knowing what proficiency and actually doing it? Dawn, we're so honored to have you here.
Oh, I'm so excited. And thank you so much for the invitation. And it's good to see both of you again.
Of course.
And I love that you guys are doing this. It's wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so Dawn, you have been in this work for more than 3 decades. What first brought you into language education and what kept you here?
A mistake brought me into language education.
A happy mistake.
A happy mistake. It's one of those things that when something is meant to happen, it happens. I actually had no intention of teaching, which is really funny since all I do now basically is train teachers. No, it was a very happy mistake. It was just meant to be. I really thought I was going to find myself walking the halls of DC as a diplomat or a liaison or something. And about a week after I graduated from college, one of my professors called me and said, there is the perfect opportunity for you. It's made for you in the school district up in the mountains in North Georgia. And he was like, I really think you should contact them. So I'm a recent grad with no job. So I was like, that sounds great. And so I looked into it. And as it turned out, I could have never, ever, ever have foreseen the doors that particular opportunity would open for me. So I was very, very blessed to be able to be part of a state initiative that was starting something brand new that had never been done before. Little did I know that was going to become my MO, was to do things that have never been done before.
You are definitely a mover and a shaker, my friend.
Oh my gosh, I live and breathe it. And I loved being able to take paint to a clean canvas and be like, let's just create something that is what we can, all the things we can dream about. And that was really what that program was about. I actually was able to be part of the very first cohort, the very first year it ever started. And so we really did found this program in Georgia. It was called the ESFL program, like the Elementary School Foreign Language Program, and it was funded by the state. And we had the enormous benefit of having Greg Duncan as our leader. He was our state supervisor. He was like my first boss of all time. He and Marcia Spielberger were at the state level, and they brought in leading experts in the field from across the country to come in and train us 4 times a year.
Wow.
So we got really intensive training by the best of the best. 4 times a year, they would come and observe us and like do walkthroughs and give us feedback. And then we would have like full weekends all day of training. And like, who gets that? Who gets the opportunity to have that as a first year teacher? And so what happened was I had a question one day about assessment. I just wondered, like, am I accountable for what my kids are learning? Because all of a sudden I got really scared that I had no idea how to report any of that. Was I supposed to be keeping up with that? And well, that question landed me in a lot of places. So it's
Hey,
like,
tell us
funny
more
you
about
should say
that.
that. Maybe you need to be on this committee and maybe you need to go ask that question over here. And so that actually is what happened. Within 2 weeks, ACTFL was putting a task force together to pull some people together, and Greg Duncan was going to be the lead of that task force to write something that later became the K-12 performance descriptors.
Wow.
And so assessment was apparently on the minds of other people too, and figuring out how well students should be performing after they've had a certain type of experience or so much time in the language. And that sort of got me kick-started down the road of proficiency and assessment and working with teachers all over. So it has been going on for a while.
So I laughingly think of you as one of the OGs of proficiency, but I mean, you really are. Now that you're telling the story, I'm like, you really are one of the OGs of proficiency. You helped write the performance descriptors. That's pretty exciting.
I can't even imagine what it must have been like to be teaching language without those, without like a standard measure or vision or some sort of like every other content area, because I come from an ELA and ESL background too, has standards, has what does this look like in action and what are we working towards? So to be teaching without that, I mean, what was that even like? How did you even go about starting that?
Well, that was the scary part for me. And I didn't realize until much later that that was not a question for people. Like they were just used to being given a list of vocabulary words and you go teach them these words in this class. And then you teach them these words for the next unit and then these words for the next unit. And then when they're ready, you can teach them to conjugate verbs and then try and put words with verbs together. I mean, it was so disjointed and it was very... I don't know if you guys know like the fly swatter game, like where you have them whack, kind of like whack-a-mole, right? The right answer.
I used that one my first year of teaching.
Yes, who hasn't?
We all
Especially
did,
with little
I
ones.
think.
But it was sort of like playing that game with planning. It was just like, oh, we haven't learned these words. Let's just teach these words, and we'll spend all our time making visuals and teaching them these words. And about 2 months into teaching, I had a little bit of an epiphany that if I gave my kids more than the word, they could use it. And I was like, why am I teaching them a word? When I could teach them the whole thing, they don't know the difference. They're going to learn the whole thing. They may not know what every word means. And I will tell you what made me think about this. It's the weirdest thing. When I was a child, we moved overseas. And I was in elementary school. My parents were missionaries. We moved to France and they were in language school. And I just got tossed into French school. Like I was the FSL student, like the French second language student, only there was no program and you were just like sink or swim. And we would play games on the playground and I learned all these kids' songs. I had no idea what they meant. I just knew that I could say every word. And then over time, I got where I was like, oh, I know what that word means now. So I would sing this song and then like there'd be these little lights that would pop on with words that I would know until over time I understood all of them. But it didn't keep me from still being a speaker and being able to use language. I knew the context. I knew what to do with it. I knew when to do it. I didn't always know what it meant, but I knew how to use it. And it hit me then, that's kind of what they can do. They may not know when they ask each other, like, what's the weather like today? They may just know the word today, but they know that whatever comes before that, they can say it and it goes with the word today. At some point, it's going to come on for them what each word is, and they don't have to know it all out of the gate. And so, like, all of a sudden, I was like, and that's okay. I was fine. I figured it out. And I would have never figured it out if they were trying to tell me to put it together like pearls on a strand. So that's kind of, I just started doing that out of sheer trial and error. It was not out of anyone teaching me to do that. But I started to realize, like, so how do I know when they know it? And how am I going to know how well they know it to be able to go on to the next thing? And that's where I started getting worried about assessment. I was also very worried because I had 500 students. And I was like, and how in the world am I supposed to be accountable for knowing where 500 kids are at any given moment?
That's a lot.
Yeah,
So
well,
I
that's
made
the
up an
elementary.
assessment game. I made up a game to assess them a little bit every day. And then I started to have this data and I didn't know what to do with it. And that's where my question came from in that workshop. I was like, so what do I do with this? And so that's how I ended up there. So Marnina, it was you were just wandering in the dark, hoping to bump into things.
Wow.
So
that
another
might
happy
make
little
you have some
mistake.
success. Huh?
Another happy little mistake or discovery.
Part of it is just making mistakes
Yeah.
and learning by trial and error.
Yeah. Well,
Truly.
and what I heard you saying, like the way you learned language was through true acquisition. And so then that was kind of how you were teaching your students then, was just this acquisition model rather than
Yeah.
what is that tension between direct instruction and acquisition? There obviously there's going to be some tension when you're in a classroom as to how to do it. But what I heard you describing was more of an acquisition mindset. Can you expound on that a little bit more?
So something Carol Ann Dahlberg, those of you who have been around for a while, you may recognize Helena Curtin and Carol Ann Dahlbergs. They were like the godmothers of language acquisition for K-8, and they were some of the trainers that worked with us. One of the first things Carol Ann ever said to us, and this, I think that this is probably the most profound thing I learned about teaching, and I have tried to help others understand this, is that the very first experience that students should have with any learning context, meaning any new information, but especially their first experience with you in their classroom and with using the language, needs to be an emotional one. And it needs to be one that they can emotionally connect with, that's positive, so that essentially what it's doing is it's like that first building block and the relationship they have with you as the teacher and their relationship they're going to have for the rest of their lives with the language. And so you want them to have an emotional hook as their first experience with any new context. And to do that, you have to make them live and breathe something. Like they have to experience something. And you can't really do that by giving them a list of words. You know what I mean? Like that's not super yay.
It's not the most emotional thing you can think of.
So I always try to think of like what is going to make them either laugh or have wonder or get excited or just something. It could be even like they have a gross experience. Like maybe they put their hands in something and then it's yucky inside. Like whatever it may be that's going to evoke an emotional response is going to connect them with the experience. And they're going to have questions. They're going to want to use language. And so it is a way, I think, to introduce the experience of acquisition. You have to have opportunity for direct instruction, but they have to want to hear it, and they have to want to experience it. And they don't have to have language experience to have an experience. And so I think that was one of the things was I was like, okay, how can I connect with them on an emotional level? And not later, like much later, because I was not a teacher. Remember, I had not had all the teacher courses at that time. I learned that like it's called an emotional hook, and like there's actually pedagogy behind this. But that was just something I never forgot, and I have also tried to remember that when I work with teachers or when I work with people like coaching or whatever it is, that we're humans and we're going to experience emotion first before we experience anything else. And the first thing that's going to evoke anxiety is the first emotion we feel around something. And anxiety is the enemy of learning. And so the sooner we can lower anxiety and create an emotion other than anxiety, the sooner we're going to be able to start making students feel like they can acquire language. They don't have to understand every word to feel it and to grow, even if it's not like a step-by-step kind of thing always. So
Absolutely. Well, so I feel that you've, in a lot of ways, you've kind of helped teachers walk through those steps of lowering anxiety towards teaching teaching towards proficiency. And so over the years that you've been doing that, we hear the word proficiency everywhere now. It's not new anymore. It was new back then, it's not new now. So what would you say that most educators understand about proficiency today that they didn't 20 years ago?
I almost think, I'm probably going to get like blasted for saying this. I almost think we're in a dangerous place right now because it is such a common term. It's like one of those things where it's like, be careful what you wish for. Because proficiency is part of all of the language that we use for everything. The problem is a lot of people know about proficiency, but they are not living and breathing the practice of proficiency-driven practices. It's kind of like, you know how when we talk about interculturality and we talk about teaching culture, like you can learn all about a culture, you can learn all about a language, and then you can go there and not know how to speak a word.
Yeah. Oh yeah. 100%.
Right? So you can learn about something and you feel very knowledgeable about that thing, but you don't actually know how to do that thing. Or you don't actually understand how that thing feels in practice. I feel like we are kind of in a space in a lot of places where teachers have heard so much about proficiency. They're just like, oh, I know, we're proficiency driven. We do all, we do the active levels and blah, blah, blah. Like, it's all this language that they know. But if it comes down to really showing that what they believe about language learning is actually what's happening in practice, that's where there's a chasm there. So I think we've made gains in the fact that people do believe that proficiency-driven practices are going to yield the highest outcomes and results, and that students are going to walk away feeling the most successful in a proficiency-driven practice and program. However, what we believe about that is not always what we practice. And I think that sometimes we make an assumption that if we believe it, it is what we do. And that is where I think there's a gap. There are people who very much believe in proficiency and they make a lot of efforts to move in that direction, but they really have not left behind practices that don't lead to proficiency. And so that's why I feel like it's a dangerous space, because you can talk the language of proficiency, but not practice proficiency.
Language proficiency isn't a single moment, it's a journey.
At Avant, we support the entire proficiency cycle, from learning to assessing real-world language use, to certifying skills that open doors beyond the classroom. Our connected platform gives educators clear data, less guesswork, and meaningful ways to recognize what learners can truly do with language.
If you're looking for a better way to support growth, from first practice to verified proficiency, visit AvantLanguage.com.
Avant, the language proficiency company.
Can you expand upon that a bit? Like, what does it mean to talk the language, and what are you noticing people are maybe having trouble of letting go of? What are they not leaving it behind, or what are you seeing? Because I know you're with classrooms all over the country and you've seen so much. Could you talk a little about the patterns of what you're not seeing when you talk about people are not able to actually take those beliefs into action? What does that look like?
Well, first, let me say this. It's not the fault of the people. Okay. We have built an infrastructure as a society and in our education system that does not support performance-based and proficiency-driven practices.
No
And
lies
so-
detected there at all. No lies detected at all.
So I just want it to be really clear. It's
Yeah.
not for a lack of effort or will on the part of teachers.
Yes, agreed.
It is very much because the infrastructure that we live inside of is very hard to break out of. And if you don't have heavy hitter advocates for you, you can only go so far, even if you are practicing. So I just want to be clear about that, because I don't want teachers being like, oh my gosh, I believe it and I practice it. I still can't do that. Understood. Like, there are just some things we can't control.
And
So
change
it's
is
like-
hard.
Change is hard. That's one piece of it.
But structural change, infrastructural
structural
change,
and systematic
systems-wide change, that is even harder. I mean,
Yeah.
God, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I mean, so Dawn was the coordinator in our school district, and then when she moved on to her next step, I took it to, stepped into her path thinking, well, there were some things she wanted to do that hopefully I can do, and then suddenly I was like, oh wow, it's really hard to make some of these changes, and it's not because even the people there didn't want them. It's just simply because of the system, the overall system, the U.S. educational system. It's not
Exactly.
even just the individual district. And I'm not being a hater. It's just there are some it's a system that's not meant for what Dawn said, performance based, and I would also add it's not meant for multiple languages to flourish. It's meant for
100%.
English to flourish. But I don't know. Sorry, that's my
Well, no, I think for
soapbox.
performance
Go
boost in
ahead.
general in any content area,
Agreed.
it's just not built to support students demonstrating what they can do. It's built to be very zeros and ones. It's yes or no. It was built on scantrons and multiple choice, right? Like the whole system built on you do what I tell you to do. You be quiet, you read, you write, you do what I tell you to do, you turn it in, and then we move on to the next lesson. I don't really care if you didn't master it. And this is going back to, like Liza said, it's a system that goes back hundreds of years.
Yeah.
It's deeply rooted. Every system in the country was built around that system.
Well, around like in industry, factory workers wrote tasks and
All of it.
all of that rather than entrepreneurship and innovation.
So when you try to disrupt that system, and there are many people, many disruptors doing their everything in the world to try and transform that. And y'all, it is like holding strong. It is deeply rooted.
You get a little pushback.
So it is not something that's easy to change. And so in our district where Liza and I were, we had a lot of benefits because we had a lot of support all the way from the top down to make some really critical changes. We even went to the state level. We got waivers for things. We went, I was active in JNCO. We went to the Capitol and asked for things. We went to the Capitol and asked for laws to be changed in our state around teacher licensure. And we went there. It was like, we will go where no man has gone before for world languages kind of thing. And we did make a lot of changes. that were amazing, but it was one district.
Yeah.
And there are districts who have done this in pockets around the country, but it takes years. When I work with school districts, they're like, "Oh, we want to do that. How long did that take you?" And I'm like, about 13 years.
Yeah.
And they're like, "Oh, like I'm retiring in 10 years." So it's discouraging. But one thing I have learned, and I learned this actually when I went to work at Avant, because I had already been doing a lot of consulting, like for ACTFL and on my own. And then when I went to Avant and I was working with Avant with school districts looking at data, I knew from my experience, data is one entry point into creating change because districts are held accountable because of data. Data can help you get like some grip to make some change. That's one entry point into creating change. But also, you have to just look at what you can change right now that's within your purview and go ahead and make those changes. Don't wait until everything else in the world is ready for you, because that is never going to happen.
Absolutely.
You have to just be willing to change the things that you can change in your practice, in your classroom. And some of those things may be using the language. Like, there's still so many teachers who teach about the language. They don't teach through the language. And so using the language in the classroom, using really effective strategies. And what I mean by that is making language comprehensible by using effective strategies that help learners understand that they don't have to know every word. They can figure out, you should be able to be on mute and they can figure out what you're saying. And then over time, they're like, "Oh, every time she points at that graph, she calls it whatever the name of that graph is. So that must be the name of that graph." And then at some point, they're going to be like, "Oh, that's a transportation graph." Or like, where they start to make connections, them having to work through that struggle is actually critical for them. And that's another point, is that proficiency-driven practices require a struggle to happen. And we are so driven by society to remove the struggle. But some struggle has to happen. It has to be productive struggle. It has to be struggle where kids hit a wall, and then you've given them everything they need to climb over that wall.
Well, especially now with technology, they're used to instant answers. If I don't know how to do something, I Google it. It tells me I've got it. If I don't know how to say something, I got Google. Like, they're not used to that productive struggle and wrestling with it.
Yeah, and I think some of the early research that's coming out about AI even is that we have to be really careful about how we're using AI, because it could dumb us down really quickly. We've got to be careful and strategic about that. The same way we have to be careful and strategic about our instruction in class, because if we just translate for kids or we speak in English for kids without comprehensible input involved when we do speak in the language, if we're not taking care of those things in a strategic way that is based on research and best practice, we're dumbing down our language classes. And then kids walk away with, "Gosh, I just wanted to learn how to speak a language. And all I do in here is something very analog, like, I don't know,
Repeating things and
I'm repeating things.
things.
I'm writing things 100 times. I'm parroting vocabulary words all day. I'm
Conjugating
conjugating verbs all day." Right? And then they walk away and they're like, "Gosh, I just wanted to be able to talk to my neighbor down the street.
Well,
But she's not interested in hearing me conjugate the verb Sarah."
Aw, why not? Well, so I hear you, and I'm wondering, what are some of the proficiency-based strategies that you are seeing in the classes where teachers really are implementing this, that help students to stay interested in you talked about the hook, the emotional hook, and then from there on, what are some of the things that you're seeing those teachers that have adopted it and owned it and felt it and are teaching truly for proficiency and allowing that productive struggle They know how to get the kids to the edge of their ability and then scaffold them just a little bit further, that zone of proximal development, if you will. What are those practices? What are some of those practices that you're seeing?
Well, first of all, I think that one of the first things is that teachers have to understand what the levels of proficiency are, but also what it looks like. You know, you can't just read a descriptor and then know what that proficiency level is. You have to understand that this description of a level looks like this in class. So, like this description, like a novice low description, you may think, oh, well, that's words. Actually, it's words, it's grunts, it's pointing, it's all these other things, and every single level has behaviors attached to them that you can encourage, and you can provide an experience to foster that behavior. What I mean by this is if you want students to be able to have conversations with each other, but you don't have an understanding that at the novice levels, they have to have scaffolded structures readily at their fingertips. You cannot expect them to only rely on memorized utterances. Well, if you're reading the description, it's like memorized utterances. We just have to memorize these utterances. Well, what are utterances anyway? So that's not what that means. What that means is they have practiced it enough in the right context that they've memorized it, even if they don't know every word of what it means. They've memorized it. They know when to use it and how to use it and what to get out of it. But they've got to be able to turn and talk to somebody and see the scaffolded material that will support them to be able to turn and talk to somebody. So they're not cheating if they need that support. They're novice. They have to have that support. So it's understanding what the environment looks like, but also the tools you're giving them to sustain language for their expected outcome, and then giving them the opportunity to do those things. Like when you are in a classroom where proficiency is really practiced, the teacher is only using language maybe 15% of the time. You are introducing, you are giving them the tools, and then you are modeling and guiding them while they practice. And then they are using language. Like they have to have the language in their mouths, in their ears. If they are not experiencing the language, they're not going to learn it. You're just up there performing every day and you go home exhausted.
Absolutely.
So that's part of it, is having that deep understanding of the levels, but what they actually look like in performance.
Yeah, and I would say I work with one school, actually the whole state has made a big push towards DLI, and they use what they call focus walls. And so that's an example of how they can have all of those scaffolds on the wall. And so they're in the process of, okay, now you've got the focus wall. Now let's make sure the kids are using the focus wall. So that's the next step. Make sure that I want to see the students looking for the words and putting the words with the pictures, looking for the sentence stems on the focus wall, so it's like having the resource, then actually using first knowing you need a resource, then getting the resource, then having the kids use the resource, then actually turning and talking to each other to use the resource. So there's multiple steps, I feel like, that you're talking about.
Yes.
But also what you said is that you have to know what that even looks like in the first place, right? So you have to have this deep understanding of what is novice low mid high, what is intermediate low mid high, what is it, and so where are they going? And that's where it all started.
And that, I think, is where this gap of knowing and doing is often coming from, because I would venture to say, and I've been saying this for 30 years, most of us in classrooms did not learn language that way. Like
that's a good point.
I had the benefit of learning it through an immersive experience. Most language teachers did not learn language that way. Most of them learned it in school. And because they never had to work through that struggle, and because they never got to experience the high of the empowerment of, oh my gosh, I figured it out. Like they never understood that runner's high that you get after you've worked through a struggle and you're like, I did it. That struggle has to have success on the other side of it that we have to help a student have. They give up when the student shows struggle because we're worried about our programs failing, about kids not taking the language, about enrollment going. Like, there's fear involved with this because it's scary when you see confusion on a kid's face. And I would even say sometimes my native speaking teachers were the worst ones. They had the most trouble staying in English because they had the greatest fear of not being understood. And so they would translate because in their day-to-day lives, when people don't understand them, they translate. And so I think part of it is, some of it is that, but some of it's they haven't had their own experience to even know what that feels like. But some of it is, as they're learning about proficiency, they're only learning about proficiency. They're not experiencing the experience of learning how to teach. They're just learning about it. They're not learning it through an immersive experience, which is why it's so important when we do professional learning with teachers. We have to reframe their experience. Okay, this is getting at like one of my core beliefs about life, about all things. And I kind of have come to believe this based off of what I learned about working with teachers. But then the more I examined it, I was like, I kind of believe this about everything in life. Interesting.
I'm going to take notes.
This is what I believe. I believe that our experiences are what forge our beliefs. So we may believe in proficiency, but if we have not experienced something that helped us really understand it, our beliefs are not like they're not convictions, right? So we have to have an experience that convicts us to have a belief about it. And the only way we're going to have an experience that deep is to be in a situation where we have relationships where we feel safe enough to take risks to have that experience. So if we have not been able to have an experience because we were scared to make a mistake or take a risk, chances are there's some unsafe feeling in there because you don't have relationships that are going to support you to step out and take those risks. So before we can expect teachers to change their practice, we have to have trusting relationships where they feel like they can take a risk, they can make a mistake, and we've got their backs. They have an experience then. They realize, oh my gosh, this works.
Yeah.
And then they can move forward because then they're convicted. So it's about relationships, it's about experiences, and that changes beliefs. And I think we saw this happen time and time again in our district because we tried to build those relationships and tried, even teachers who were like, oh, I'm scared I'm going to mess up, or oh, the parents are all going to be mad. And I'm like, that's okay. If they're mad, you're doing something right. Like, call me. I'll get them off your back. If you're using the language, I'll take the heat for that. You're supposed to be. So it's a whole system at play there. And that's why if a teacher wants to do this on their own, in their own classroom, they've got to have conversations with their administration. They've got to have these conversations with their students and with their parents. So everyone understands, like, we're about to take a big risk. It's going to be okay. I'm not going to let you fail.
Yeah.
You know?
I really love that. And I love that idea of that support and not being alone in it and being okay with, like, I think as a society, we're really afraid of failure, of messing up or making a mistake. And another fear I hear a lot when I'm working with teachers and coaching towards proficiency is this fear around letting go of that teaching grammar and teaching structures, and that fear of not preparing students for upper levels. I hear a lot, like, if I only focus on communication, how will I know that they know the structures they need for level 4, level 5, AP? How will I know I've prepared them? And that's a really big mindset shift that I hear a lot of resistance around. So do you have any insight around that? Because that's the other thing I'm hearing a lot right now.
Oh my gosh. Yes. and it's, yes. So here it goes back to understanding really deeply understanding and experiencing the descriptors. And here's why. You're not ever going to reach the higher levels that you have targeted and you are working towards in level 4, level 5, and AP and IB or immersion. You're never going to reach those levels without grammar. Like, grammar has to happen. It has to happen. Here's the funny thing about it. If you teach grammar and you don't teach for communication, you're also never going to reach those levels.
Exactly.
So
Yeah.
the grammar has to be taught in a context of what the message is that needs to be communicated and how. And so it cannot be taught in isolation, just like you cannot teach communication in isolation without grammar.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? Otherwise, we're not having this conversation. We're not understanding each other.
Yeah.
Right.
It's like a bunch
You
of
just have to
gobbledygook.
understand at certain proficiency levels, there is an expectation for lots of errors and mistakes, and you have to learn to be okay with that because that's where they are. And so if you've ever been a parent, like when I'm working with teachers and I can say to them, like, how many of you have children? When your children started speaking, were they just like fluent spokesman out of the gate? They could just speak eloquently from the moment they started speaking? No, it's an evolution of language that happens. And we have to remember the same is going to happen in our classroom. And the more opportunity we give them for mistakes, the more opportunity they have to speak, the more opportunity they have for feedback. If we're giving them feedback, then they can learn from that feedback and try again. Make a mistake, learn, try again. It becomes a cycle. And the more comfortable they get with making that cycle happen as a teacher, the more comfortable students will be when making the mistakes and learning from them. So you have to create this cycle that is like okay, I know I'm going to make a mistake, but I know you've got my back. Same thing we just talked about with teachers. I know I'm going to make a mistake. I know you've got my back. I'm going to learn from it and I'm going to be better for it. When you start getting into the intermediate descriptors on up into advanced, you're going to see where accuracy comes in, and it is critical. It's not that you don't teach it before, it's just that you don't penalize them for it before because they're not accountable for the accuracy. They're just accountable for being understood and understanding. The greater their proficiency level grows, the more they're becoming orators, the more they're becoming specific and complex in their communication, the more they're going to need that grammar to communicate at that level. And it's appropriate then to be more specific in that grammar instruction then because they're ready for it and they'll have a message they can actually apply it to. So it goes back to understanding those descriptors in great detail.
Well, I love how you explained that so naturally. And if I could just tie it to theory a little bit, like if you think about Swain's output hypothesis, I think that's the whole point. If students don't speak, if they don't output, whether spoken or written, they're not going to know what they don't know. So when they try to speak, that's when they realize, oh, I don't quite know how to say what I wanted to say. But they're obviously speaking for a message of some sort, for a communicative purpose of some sort. So then they notice, I need to learn X, Y, Z. But it's only if that's happening in this communicative context that then they're motivated to communicate. So they have to go back and learn what those gaps are that they're missing. And so it's like, it's like you said, they all it goes together. The grammar, the communication, the proficiency, it all goes together. You can't separate it. And if I could just transition that into a little talk about literacy, what part does that play? I mean, I know you are pretty big on authentic resources. So, what part does literacy play in all of this and what the input that they receive in terms of what kind of output our students can then create, and in terms of just multiliteracy? Because when you were talking about even the novice learners and how they that includes grunting and
Mhm.
and you know, moving their faces. To me, that's multiliteracies. That's
Yeah.
multi
Mhm.
modes of communication. So I don't know, talk to us a little bit about the role of literacy, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, I will tell you you're going to think this is really interesting. When I first began teaching and we were just doing lists, right? Um, we were told under no uncertain terms were we supposed to show students writing until they had really mastered it orally. And I was just like, okay.
And
But they are hounding me to write this word on the wall. Like, they want to see it because some kids need to see it. Some kids come to kindergarten and they can read already.
yeah,
Like, some kids were ready for it.
yeah.
And I was like, we're trying to do everything that's developmentally appropriate for students. And if we're teaching them to read and write in their early years, would it not be developmentally appropriate for them to also have access to this at the same time? So, that's all changed now, thankfully. That's all changed. But what I learned very early on was it's sort of like with the spoken language, they do need a lot of input to kind of untangle things in their brain sometimes before output. That's normal. It doesn't mean that you're going to tell them you can only listen for the next 2 months. I don't want you to say anything. It just means I'm okay with you needing a while before you're ready to output. You're going to let me know when you're ready for that because you're going to say something. Right? So it's kind of a similar kind of thing. I think that we know so much more now about how the brain learns and how much stronger the four skills are together when they're taught together at the same time. So you're going to be a much stronger reader if you are writing at the same time that you are reading. You're going to be a much stronger speaker if you are listening at the same time you have to be able to speak. Like, they kind of go together, and like peanut butter and jelly. So I think that a lot of language teachers are not, now this is in like a world language scenario, although I would argue that also in a lot of immersion situations, they are not taught to teach students how to read. And so they make an assumption sometimes that if a student knows how to do it in their first language, they automatically know how to do it in their second language. And while there are, I don't have to tell you, a lot of skills that transfer, they do not all transfer. And certainly things do not sound or look the same. And so I think that we have a long way to go in helping teachers understand how to support literacy. And I think one of the strongest things we can do is to give students opportunities to engage with authentic resources and experience some success with those, because that's going to make them feel like, oh, I don't have to understand every little nuance and every word. I have context that I could figure out. And I did it with something that was actually written for a native speaker. And I figured that out. Like, helping them understand those small victories along the way, and then getting them to a point where they have questions like, well, why is it in French there's so many commas? Like every time you pause, you put a comma. Well, I wish I had known that, because when I came back to the States and went to college, my English papers looked like a massacre had happened because
Too
I
many
put a
commas.
French comma everywhere, and my English professors did not like that at all. So, like, but you have to want them to have an emotional, like a desire to know and observe differences, and then make sense out of those differences and use authentic materials and realia to help them have cultural literacy, help them have some digital literacy, and also, obviously, especially with little ones, actual learning how to read and understand actual reading in another language. There's so many layers to the
Yeah.
literacy piece.
It is
Like,
I mean, I know I say it almost every episode. I mean, I'm obsessed with literacy. I can't, it's like I go up for a walk with the dogs and I'm thinking about literacy. I go to sleep at night and I can't sleep sometimes because I'm like thinking about how to improve multilingualism and multiliteracy and how it's taught. I mean, I'm genuinely obsessed with it. And so we look at people like work like Cummins, groundbreaking work that's not new.
mhm.
But then even more recent people like Goldenberg, Katz, people that are kind of more
Yeah.
current in the science of reading, and they're looking at this, how the L1 affects the L2, or how the cross-linguistic transfer, or how, oracy affects reading comprehension. And so there's a lot of research out there. But what we've been talking about a lot is really what you said, is how if you don't understand how proficiency develops, how are you going to ever really teach a kid how to read in another language? And that was my aha moment in terms of even this whole kind of multiliterate mind idea that we're exploring, is what's that nexus of
Yeah.
proficiency, literacy, but more broadly multiliteracy, because what are they really going to be able to do in reading and writing, and how do you really teach them? Because it's different when it's one language versus two languages versus, Brandy and I were just talking about this, like, okay, so it's elementary. These are kids that are still learning to decode in their first and their second language at the same time versus world language, which often happens in middle or high school. They already know how to decode and read and write in a first language, and now you're adding a second language on top of it. Those are two very different things, but that's still literacy. So I don't know what, just
it's so intriguing.
Enlighten us a little bit more. I know you have.
I don't know if I can enlighten you anymore. I mean, and you already know, like, the research and everything. What I can say is this: the proficiency descriptors are not just for world languages. They're not just for second languages or third languages. They are how you develop language, period. When we begin learning to speak a language, it doesn't matter if it's your first language, you're going to go through those levels, right? And you can call the levels whatever you want to. Like, I know different countries like CEFR, there's like different scales, all these different things. It's still a similar progression of going from grunting and pointing to complex, discourse length conversations, right? And so I know when I have worked with like two-way immersion programs or 50-50 programs, sometimes when I have done proficiency training with the English language teachers who were part of the training with everyone else, the ahas that they have had, and they've just been like, oh my gosh, why aren't we doing this? Like, things all of a sudden make sense to them. They're like, we are pushing too hard in this area with this part of our program in English. We need to back up a second. And just the lights that come on, because it's just how we develop communication, period. And that's all those 4 skills are, is it's communication.
Yeah.
And so I think it's really interesting, because the more deeply you understand what those levels represent in action and in practice, the more you understand how to serve students and their needs. And so I don't think it matters which language it's in, or if it's your second or your third, you may go faster, but you're still going to go through those stages.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we could probably talk all day. This has been fascinating to me, at least, hopefully to our listeners as well. And so let me just ask you one more question. So what still gives you hope? I know we've talked about a lot of the challenges, but what still gives you hope about where language education is headed?
For me, I think it's just seeing the next generation. I can remember when I was a young teacher some of my mentors being like, "Oh, I'm so relieved to see this younger generation coming through." And I would just be like, "Oh, that's awesome. Thank you." Now I'm like, "Oh, I get it." Now I'm the one on that end going, "Oh my gosh, I'm so relieved." Because there are actually some really incredibly brilliant and smart teachers and researchers. You ladies are part of that, but who are coming into this field and discovering and uncovering new things, but also diving deeper into practices that are going to make this more possible for teachers to grab hold of and actually practice. And I think we're at a point where we're recognizing that a lot of people know about good practice. What they need to know is how to practice that practice. And we've got some strong people out there practicing.
Yeah, we do.
More people than ever. And I think that gives me hope, because it means that the community is growing. The awareness and understanding of what learners need to grow in their proficiency, but also to use language for real world purposes that are meaningful, is growing. And that's the whole reason. That's why we do what we do in the first place. It's not just for them to learn a language and go sit in a room somewhere for the rest of their lives.
Yeah,
right?
absolutely.
So that's what gives me hope. It's people.
Thank you. Thank you so
People.
much. I so enjoyed learning from you and your passion and your knowledge of where we've been and where we're going. And for our listeners and viewers, if you were intrigued by something in this episode and want to add to this conversation, comment below. Remember to like, subscribe, and share this podcast in your networks. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, ladies.
Thank you, Dawn.
All opinions expressed in this podcast and the comments are solely those of the individual and not necessarily those of Avant.